The Holy Spirit's mission is to enable you to bear witness for Christ. But if you believe in God, you will never be let down. He won't let you down. Pastor John Hagee was a giant in the pulpit for decades, with millions of people listening to his thunderous sermons and steadfast support for Israel. However, the mask starts to come off around 84. He's not hiding behind politics or the Bible tonight. He's revealing what his detractors muttered, what his supporters dreaded, and what he vowed never to reveal. This goes beyond simple revelation. It's a reckoning. Pastor John Hagee has been a prominent figure in evangelical Christianity for many years. Sanctuaries were rocked by his sermons. His steadfast support for Israel influenced American politics, and millions of people throughout the world heard his voice through his television broadcasts. He was more than just a preacher to his followers. He was a fighter, a leader, and a prophet who never shied away from conflict. But the brightness was usually followed by shadows. His extravagant lifestyle, his political connections, and remarks that even his supporters found difficult to explain were all mentioned by his detractors. Traditional evangelicals were shaken by his divorce in the 1970s. In addition to garnering international notice, his four blood moons prophecy also generated doubt, and his name became involved in presidential politics. From his audacious prayer at Donald Trump's Republican convention to John McCain's rejection of his endorsement, Hagee is no longer avoiding the questions at the age of 84. Behind the pulpit, he acknowledges his failures, regrets, and even doubts in a rare, uncensored interview. This was more than a confession for a guy who established one of the most influential ministries in America. It was a reckoning. There is more to John Hagee's narrative than sermons and prophecies. It's about personal struggle, politics, power, and a revelation that might change how people view him. It starts far before the pulpit, too. John Hagee's journey did not start in front of television cameras or the lights of a large church. In 1940, it began in Baytown, Texas. He was born into a pious Christian household. His parents were preacher William Bithell Hagee and housewife Vadwick Hagee, who surrounded their little home with prayer and scripture. His home was not the only place where faith was taught. It lived, breathed, and was expected. Young John was already giving sermons in small churches, while standing behind pulpits by the time he was a teenager, and his voice carried much beyond his years. The boy preacher with the loud conviction was whispered about in congregations. However, pressure was also present behind the passion. Expectations were high, and every error felt exaggerated, since you were a pastor's kid. Hagee continued his study in the 1960s, graduating from Trinity University with a degree in English and history, and then going on to acquire a master's degree in educational management. But even in textbook-filled classrooms, he could always find his purpose. He was learning more than just how to lead. He was getting ready to command crowds. However, he had a turbulent early life. In conservative circles, the dissolution of his first marriage to Martha Downing in 1975 would follow him for decades. Such a scandal would put a stop to the careers of many preachers. It was just the beginning for John Hagee, as his biggest breakthrough would occur in the same year that he had his biggest personal defeat. The pivotal year was 1975. John Hagee sowed the seeds for Cornerstone Church, his life's biggest endeavor, in the same year that his first marriage ended. In San Antonio, it began as a little, unassuming church. Hagee's exuberance, however, was everything but typical. His voice roared with assurance. People were captivated to a speaker who spoke as if time were running out because his message broke with tradition. The crowds increased. The modest sanctuary grew into a massive megachurch with thousands of seats in less than 10 years. Hagee was no longer merely a preacher in the area. He was extraordinary, and he was aware that television has the power to ignite a local spark that spreads around the world. His sermons quickly spread to homes on other continents, after traveling across the airways and into American living rooms. With his combination of ferocious sermons, political analysis, and unreserved statements, millions of people watched. Hagee was a household name by the 1980s. He was preaching more than just the Bible. He was in the news. His words were like a hammer, whether he was discussing the destiny of Israel, America's role in prophecy, or moral decline and culture. However, the level of examination increases with platform height. He created an empire because of his audacity. However, it also set the stage for the initial round of scandals that would put all he had created to the test. John Hagee had firmly entered the national spotlight by the middle of the 1980s. Church at Cornerstone was flourishing. His voice became one of the loudest in evangelical America, and his television ministry touched millions of people. Hagee wasn't merely preaching. He was influencing discussions about morals, politics, and the country's future. His words were audacious, unrepentant, and frequently divisive. He connected world events to end-time prophecies, warning that America would sink if it deviated from biblical values, and never held back from making political statements. He was seen by his followers as a fearless teller of the truth. He blurred the distinction between politics and pulpit, according to his detractors. When presidential candidate John McCain publicly rejected Hagee's endorsement in 2008, due to criticism sparked by resurrected remarks about the Catholic Church, the first significant firestorm broke out. Such a controversy would have put a stop to the public influence of many clergy. However, Hagee persevered, reaffirming his beliefs and dismissing detractors as evidence that he was shaking the proper cages. His attitude toward Israel merely fueled the flames. He became a political force that Israeli officials embraced, and parliamentarians courted by creating Christians United for Israel. But there were questions at home. Was he using religion to gain power, or was he serving God? And this was just the start for Hagee's most intimate struggle. The one that would try not only his reputation but also his faith was about to hit him in the most vulnerable place. Life off stage was far more precarious than the authority John Hagee held behind the pulpit. One of his darkest struggles came in the early 2000s. Diana, his wife, received a cancer diagnosis. The news was devastating for a man who was known for his unwavering faith. He would then acknowledge, "It was the hardest thing I've ever faced." However, Hagee was managing a worldwide broadcast ministry, overseeing a congregation of 20,000 members, and dealing with ongoing criticism regarding his wealth and politics, while Diana was undergoing treatment. Every night called for tears, and every sermon called for strength. Privately, doubt began to creep in, but his ardent preaching never wavered. Did he have the strength to keep it all together? The scrutiny only became more intense. His extravagant residence, his vocal support of Israel, and his involvement in presidential campaigns portrayed him as a political manipulator as well as a prophet. Insisting that he was God's voice, supporters rallied. Critics mockingly referred to him as a hypocrite. The fact that faith does not make fear go away was something Hagee wrestled with throughout it all. Although Diana's recuperation was relieving, the scars persisted. The weight of his preaching increased. There was a deeper edge to his voice. He had given sermons about enduring adversity. He had experienced it now. However, the conflicts had not ended, because Hagee's ministry was growing globally at the same time that new scandals were set to surface, ones that would test his convictions and his legacy. Israel was, if anything, the one issue that most characterized John Hagee. Supporting the Jewish state was not political to him. It was foretold. He established Christians United for Israel in 2006, and it soon became the world's biggest pro-Israel group. The number of members surpassed 10 million in a matter of years. Politicians from Washington waited in line for CUFI's annual summit. Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli authorities embraced Hagee as a reliable ally. Hagee's logic seemed obvious. The entire globe is impacted by what happens to Israel. His voice reverberated from Texas to Tel Aviv, as he proclaimed that God had commanded Christians to support Israel. Israel was portrayed in his ferocious speeches as the canary in the coal mine, a country whose fate foretold the fate of other nations. This was biblical obedience to his followers. It was perilous political entanglement, according to his detractors. Hagee refuted accusations that he promoted dual covenant theology, which held that Jews were exempt from accepting Christ. Others said that his activism made it difficult to distinguish between foreign policy and preaching. Hagee never gave up, though. His ministry expanded well beyond the boundaries of the United States, thanks to his defense of Israel, which became the cornerstone of his global brand. However, as his impact expanded globally, so did the opposition. His empire's ability to withstand the fire would soon be put to the test by a barrage of criticism regarding his money, his statements, and his tactics. Preaching was never enough for John Hagee. His ministry invested millions of dollars in action, since he frequently stated that faith without action was meaningless. Schools were constructed in Africa, clean water wells were dug, and emergency aid was delivered to areas devastated by hurricanes and earthquakes, because to John Hagee ministries, food and clothing made their way into underprivileged areas throughout Latin America, and medical supplies made their way to hospitals in Nigeria. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews presented him with the Humanitarian of the Year award in 2019. However, he waved them away when questioned about the honors. His words, "It's not about recognition. If we can help just one person, then it's worth it. However, beneath the worldwide influence, a more subdued battle gnawed at him. Hagee acknowledged that his unwavering devotion to his vocation had frequently come at the price of his family. He admitted, "I haven't always been there the way I should have," referring to times he didn't spend with his kids. His daughter Tish had her own writing career, while his son Matthew eventually became the leader of Cornerstone Church. However, Hagee bore the burden of years in which his family was ranked second to the pulpit. Doubts followed him even as his legacy spread across continents. Could his private regrets be erased by his good deeds throughout the world? Because he had yet to make the most shocking revelation, the one that would upset even his most devoted supporters. John Hagee projected certainty for decades. His sermons roared with power. He had conviction in his forecasts, and he sounded unwavering in his support for Israel. However, the facade broke down in a rare interview. Few could have predicted the admission made by the man who established one of America's most powerful ministries at the age of 84. He had struggled with doubt behind the pulpit. "I have occasionally doubted everything. There were moments when I questioned if I was actually doing what God had called me to do, or if I was actually making a difference." His supporters were taken aback by his admission. Televangelism is not a profession that frequently celebrates vulnerability. Admitting uncertainty is a sign of weakness, and Hagee has never displayed weakness. A human preacher was exposed by his confession. Supporters witnessed his unflinching strength, but in private, he struggled with anxiety, regret, and tiredness. He acknowledged that there were times when he had carried remorse in silence, comments he wished he could take back, and choices he wished he had done differently. Critics saw this as confirmation. Believers were taken aback. What would happen to everything he had created if even John Hagee doubted his course? However, the revelation wasn't complete, since his following confession was much more personal than anyone had thought, and directly related to the one problem that characterized his ministry. John Hagee did not cite politics or strategy. When asked why Israel had become the focus of his life's work, he mentioned a time when he was by himself on the Mount of Olives in the 1970s. He was overcome with a sense of calm as he gazed across Jerusalem. What he said was the voice of God summoning him to defend Israel. His ministry would never divorce faith from that mission after that day. He acknowledged that it was more than merely theology. It was intimate. "I was aware that speaking up for Israel was my vocation." That belief shaped his books, his lobbying, and his sermons for decades. It made him a prophet to some. For others, it made him a religiously disguised political operative. A deeper truth was also disclosed by the disclosure. Hagee had never quite been accepted by the Christian establishment. He has always been a rebel and a maverick. "I've received criticism because of that, but I've never let that deter me." His experience was reframed by this outsider self-portrait. He was more than just a strong pastor. He was a man who felt that God had chosen him, even if it meant that he would not be accepted by his contemporaries. But Hagee's narrative was far from over at 84. He was not done fighting, as his next episode would demonstrate. Indeed, his most audacious plans were still to come. John Hagee is setting a new course for himself, at a time when most men peacefully retire. He is doubling down instead of slowing down. Although his ministry has previously embraced global television, podcasts, and live streaming, he is now venturing farther into the digital realm. New platforms aimed at younger audiences, extended social media campaigns, and interactive experiences are all in the works. Hagee has a defined mission. There are more people in the world than ever before. Technology is the only means to reach the billions of people who haven't received the message. The gospel never changes, even though the tools may, he argues. He is simultaneously focusing on the leadership landscape of the future. He has started preparing young pastors to continue the tradition long after he has gone through the Hagee Ministries Leadership Academy. His objective is to develop 100 new leaders who will preach with much more conviction and reach. But questions remain even as he prepares for tomorrow. His acknowledgement of uncertainty exposed flaws in the once unwavering reputation of a preacher. His admirers question if his best days are over or still to come. And the man who once admitted that he fought his hardest fights in silence. He has made hints that he has yet to reveal some things.